YouTube. So my name is Angie. I was diagnosed roughly about 6 months ago with dissociative identity disorder. Since then, I've done a lot of research on it. I've tried to educate myself and educate others as well. So I kind of wanted to do just a video blog because of the questions that I've had about it. Um, and hopefully I'll be able to educate some people about what it actually is. Um, so I'll go ahead and get started with some questions that I have quite a bit, or most frequent questions. The first one is, of course, what is dissociative identity disorder? So basically, it used to be called multiple personality disorder, if that helps out at all. Um, And it has actually been featured in films such as Sybil, The Three Faces of Eve. Also, another very famous multiple personality system was Trudy Chase, who wrote the book One Rabbit House. There's been several others as well. Basically, what happens if you imagine a child, um, usually under the age of 9 is when it happens, who is abused or who goes through some sort of a trauma. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be abuse that causes it, because what's traumatic to me may not be traumatic to somebody else. So, in some cases, it is natural disasters, kidnapping, um, things of that nature that causes the split in personality. Um, Normally, it is actually abuse. And it's something that goes long term. It's not something necessarily that just only happens one time. So what happens is, you take this child who has this trauma happen, and as a coping skill or as a coping mechanism, their brain splits or their personality splits. Once that cycle starts, it generally continues. The average number of personalities is 10. You can have up to 100. You can also have as few as 2. Um, So that's what dissociative identity disorder is. Children who have it tend to be gifted in some way or very intelligent. They may start to talk sooner than most children. They may start to use full sentences. Um, Probably, if not for the abuse, if not for the trauma, they would grow up to be geniuses. Um, so that's what dissociative identity disorder is. Um, The other question that I get a lot is, what is it like to have it? And it's kind of hard to explain, just because for the longest time I actually thought that the way I was is the way that everybody was. I thought that everybody had people inside of them. So, um, well, one thing that I can explain, or that I can tell you as far as what it's like, I remember looking back and, where most kids have imaginary friends that are on the outside. They play with them. Mom sets maybe a little place at the table for them every day. Um, that's what normal kids do with their imaginary friends. My imaginary friends would take over my body and talk, and then I would be back in my body and I would talk to them. So I kind of thought that was the just my imaginary friends were different. So it never occurred to me that there was anything amiss. I was just a kid. Um, so that's what kind of for me what it has been like my entire life. Um, the difference between me and a lot of multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder sufferers is that we're all conscious of each other. We do actually know what the others are doing, with the exception of a few. Very seldom do I have blackouts. Normally, I know what's going on. The way that I always explain it is, imagine that you're driving in a car. And you're the one who's driving, you're in the steering wheel, so you're controlling where the car is going. You're controlling what's on the radio, you're controlling how fast the car is going. So then imagine driving the passenger side. Somebody else is driving, they're directing where the car goes, they're directing, what's on the radio, they're directing how fast they go. You can tell them or you can ask them to change or to do something else, but they don't have to necessarily. So basically, that's what it's like to have it. It's basically like riding passenger seat in a car while somebody else drives. And times when I'm extremely disassociated, it will actually feel like I'm not in the car at all. That I'm just maybe watching the car from overhead and watching it do whatever it's doing. So that's a lot like what it's like to have it. It's kind of hard to explain it though. um, but another way to explain it is, imagine if you have commentary going on your entire life about what you're doing. And I mean, it's not necessarily bad commentary, or, if there's constant, I usually call it chatter, if there's constant chatter going on in your head. And it's not usually negative. A lot of times it's just everyday stuff. One of my personalities might be coming up with a to-do list. Another one is saying she wants to go home and work on, a beading project. Another one of the little ones, is saying that she would like some ice cream. So it's not always bad voices that I hear. Usually it's just commentary on my everyday to-day life. So that's a lot what it's like to have. Um, the other question I get a lot is, how common is dissociative identity disorder? And this is where I actually disagree with some of the experts. And then, well, we actually disagree with the experts on this because a lot of us have actually felt the same way. Um, Dissociative identity disorder is thought to occur in about 0.01 to 1% of the human population. Um, Here's the thing, though. There's different degrees of disassociation. We're considered a moderate case. So our disassociation is not to the point where we have blackouts where it's completely debilitating, even though we are considered disabled. Basically, what happens, or what our thinking on the matter. Take every child in the world, every child who is born. Okay, and then out of that, take the ones that are gifted. And then out of the ones that are gifted, take the ones that are abused severely, or who have the perfect storm, so to speak, for creating multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder. Now, imagine those who are too ashamed to come forward with their symptoms. The cases of abuse that never get reported. And then you can kind of see where I'm coming from with that we think it actually is something that's more common than you might expect. We also do think that the diagnosis criteria for it is out of date. I very seldom have blackouts, and that's why it took so long for me to be diagnosed. I have been slapped with every other label, psychological label you can think of. I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, severe depression, schizophrenia, and none of those really fit very well. And a lot of those were what is basically called a wastebasket diagnosis. We don't know what else is wrong with you, so here's a label. Borderline personality disorder is the one that I'm still fighting with a lot of professionals with. Because they say, well, maybe it's just a part of you or a different part of you. And, they are different parts of me, but they're a little bit more different than most people would think. Which actually, when I was explaining about dissociative identity disorder, one thing that I forgot to mention is how different these personalities or these identities can be. There is a 3-year-old inside of me who, she's left-handed, I'm right-handed. She believes in heaven, I believe in the afterlife. She apparently, I've heard that when she comes out, my eyes turn very bright green. They're green right now, but they just get really bright, really wide, and really sparkly. There is another alter who, she is very blue. She basically, her eyes turn blue. She's usually more calm, assertive. Um, so there's very big differences. Some people with their personalities, they can have a personality who needs glasses, or they'll have a personality who likes to smoke when they don't smoke. So these personalities can be very, very, very different. They're very seldom, just these subtle changes. So that's something I did want to mention. Somebody has asked, of course, what it does to relationships. And it can make it really difficult. Right now, we actually do have a really hard time with relationships. For one, on top of dissociative identity disorder, we also do have PTSD and major depression. Um, that's pretty common, actually. When somebody has one disorder, those others go hand in hand with it. So it is pretty common. So we have trust issues. Um, and also, imagine if you were in a relationship with somebody and you're head over heels in love with them, and then you come home one day and you put your arms around them and you say, "Hi, honey, I'm home." And they look at you and go, "Who the hell are you?" It would be pretty scary. It would be a little off-putting for you. That's where it kind of gets complicated. Normally, I'm very open about the fact that I do have this disorder, for that very reason, just to let people know, hey, just to let you know, occasionally I turn into a 3-year-old. And it does take somebody who has a lot of understanding and who is a very loving individual in order for me to, even consider a relationship with them. So that's what it does to the relationships. And of course, there's the issue of what does it do as far as my sex life goes. Um, Normally I wouldn't talk about it, but this actually did seem like a very relevant, legitimate topic. Um, Somebody that I was in a sexual relationship with once did say that he worried about, suddenly me going from enjoying what was happening to feeling like I was being abused again. Um, and it actually is a very legitimate worry. It's a very legitimate concern. My advice would be to you, if you find out somebody that you love or somebody you're interested in a relationship with has dissociative identity disorder, you need to be open. You need to talk about it. You need to talk about all of the alters. Which ones are triggery, which ones are more afraid of sexual activity. In my case, 2 of my personalities, myself and one other, are sexual. The rest of them usually either don't have an interest from it, or don't have an interest in it, I should say, or they hide. So that's usually the way that works. We'll leave it at that. How is it treated is another question I get. There is not a medication regimen that has been approved for multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. They're the same thing. Um, Antidepressants can be prescribed. The problem is, for us, they have backfired quite a bit. Usually it works very well for some of the personalities, for others it doesn't work very well. The reason, because multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, is not a chemical imbalance. It is basically the way that the brain is wired. Your brain is wired at this point to have more than one person living inside of it. So, whereas with schizophrenia, bipolar, the symptoms can be managed with medication. With dissociative identity disorder, that's not possible. But it can help with the symptoms. Sometimes it can help with depression if they find the right combination for you. What is integration? Integration is what a lot of people do call the goal of therapy. It kind of depends on who you ask, though. Um, Basically, the clinical definition of it is, when the personalities gradually become one, or when the person becomes one whole person. If you ever watch the movie or read the book, by Trudy Chase, or about Trudy Chase. She had over 100 personalities and she refused to integrate. The reason she refused to integrate, and we actually follow this line of reasoning, the reason she refused to integrate is because to her it would be like murdering. It would be getting rid of parts of herself. Um, and, when you've gone your entire life hearing these voices in your head that aren't always mean voices, I mean, sometimes they are, sometimes they can be very nasty, but they seldom are. When you go through your life hearing these voices, though, thinking about them being gone would be so lonely and just horrible. Um, so, I mean, that's what integration is. Basically, it is removing the alters or helping the alters become one person. Um, we don't actually want to do that. That's not our goal. We do have a feeling that after therapy goes on for a while, eventually some of our alters will, you know, gradually integrate. Right now there's 8 of us, but only 3 of us are prominent, or only 3 of us are out on a regular basis. The rest of them are usually out once in a while. Um, one of which actually gets us hospitalized on a regular basis. So that's kind of why that's actually not very uncommon for it to be hard for people with multiple personality disorder to keep a job, or to keep relationships, is because there's just a chaotic sort of switching with personalities, things like that, that make it difficult to have a relationship. Um, One thing I will say about what it's like to be in a relationship with me is, and this is common for people with dissociative identity disorder, we have an issue with scheduling. The reason I say this is, so let's say I schedule a doctor's appointment tomorrow. And then a friend calls and an alter answers the phone and says, "Hey, do you want to go for lunch tomorrow?" And lunch happens to be at the same time that I have my doctor's appointment scheduled, but my alter doesn't necessarily know that or doesn't remember it because even though she saw me make the appointment, or she was watching me make the appointment, she may not remember that the appointment's there because she didn't do it. So we do tend to get overbooked. What we've been doing to kind of remedy that problem is to put everything into our cell phone calendar so that we know who scheduled what to happen. And we just kind of have a rule where we all try to discuss, setting up any activities before we do. So that definitely does help. So now to kind of to discuss what dissociative identity disorder is not. I wanted to bring this up because I've had a lot of experience with people who have misconceptions about it. I've been told that it doesn't actually exist, that it's actually, scientists have discovered that it's bipolar disorder. So, if you look on the Mayo Clinic, this is actually where I got all my information. If you go to the Mayo Clinic, look up the symptoms for bipolar disorder, the symptoms of dissociative identity disorder. They're completely different. Bipolar disorder is a chemical imbalance, and it does actually normally respond to medication. DID does not, and it's not a chemical imbalance. It's basically the way your brain is wired. Bipolar people generally, depending on the type of bipolar, I know that there's several different types, but we're going to focus on one particular, which is the type that has your manic and your depressive episodes. The manic would be the euphoria, happy feeling. The depression would be, down in the dumps, the opposite of that. So that's what bipolar is. Dissociative identity disorder, it's not just mood swings. And this has bothered me because a lot of people have said, well, I have mood swings too. This is not just a mood swing. This is actually me changing my entire personality. Some people who have dissociative identity disorder, their alters are even a different sex They may be a different species. They may not even be human at all. So it's not just a mood swing, it is a completely separate person. The other one that gets confused with multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, is schizophrenia. And part of the reason that I kind of started on this mission to educate people about it, when I was working, which I'm unfortunately not employed anymore, but when I was working at a call center. And, every day we have our chat that's up on the screen so that my team could communicate with each other. I had a customer on the phone who kind of was giving me a weird feeling. Basically, during the course of the call, he gave me 3 names for who he was. Um, and so to me, because he was trying to use somebody else's credit card, so to me it was a fraud issue. I sent it over to my supervisor. My supervisor sent them to the automated to the automated system so that they could make a payment that way because he wasn't going to take the payment either. So one of my coworkers, who happened to be a gentleman who thinks he knows everything, and had always been a know-it-all, and I didn't like him in the least, and I still don't like him. He said, "Well, maybe the customer was schizophrenic, and so is he." Ha 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 ha. The reason that it bothered me is, first off, he was using the wrong disorder, for one. But secondly, I'm not going to say that we don't have a sense of humor. I'm not going to say that we can't joke about it. Because when you have dissociative identity disorder, when you have schizophrenia, when you have any mental health disorder, you've got to have a sense of humor about it. Because that's really the only way to cope with it. But when you do not have any of those issues, making light of somebody else's suffering is not okay. And I don't know why people think it's okay to make fun of schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, or dissociative identity disorder, or bipolar. I mean, to me, that's like going up to somebody who's in a weird wheelchair with MS and making fun of their disorder, or, somebody who is going through cancer and making fun of their disorder. It's not okay. Just because we're not necessarily terminal or we don't, look sick, does not mean it's okay to make fun of our suffering. But the difference between schizophrenia and DID is night and day. They're really completely different disorders. Schizophrenia is actually an imbalance in the brain chemicals. It is not necessarily the way the brain is wired. Whereas for DID, the person has to have some kind of trauma that has set off that condition. Schizophrenia, you don't have to necessarily have a trauma. It's not uncommon for people who have it to have been abused in the past, but it's not needed for that disorder. Also, the symptoms are completely different. Schizophrenics often have, disorganized thinking, negative symptoms, meaning an absence of normal functioning like eye contact, emotions, things like that, catatonic episodes. So they have a lot of different symptoms. Those who have schizophrenia also, the most notable symptom is, of course, hallucinations, both auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations. Not necessarily something that people with DID have. Not saying that one is worse than the other by any means. I wouldn't wish, schizophrenia on anybody, and most people wouldn't wish DID on anybody. So neither one is bad or worse than the other, but, they're two separate disorders. Also, schizophrenia responds to medication. DID doesn't. So those are the main differences. Now, there are still going to be people, I'm sure, in the notes down below or in the comments down below who tell me otherwise. But if you go to the Mayo Clinic website, and if you look at any other website, you can see that there is a very clear difference between multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder and schizophrenia. The other thing that comes up a lot is demon possession. Because I do have interest in the paranormal, I actually did research this just to look at the symptoms. And I can understand, actually, I will give most people credit. I can understand where they are coming up with this from. The thing is, a lot of times with demon possession, it is something that's, I don't want to say necessarily sudden because there is a gradual onset, but generally it's later in life. It's not something that necessarily comes from a trauma. Also, it is from an outside influence, a spirit, demon, whatever. Um, and outside of the person's suffering, there is usually phenomenon that's happening, the knockings, the rappings, the voices, the whispers, that other people experience beyond that person. So, that's kind of the difference there as far as demonic possession. I'm not going to go too much into it. If you wanted more information on it, you can definitely research it online. But it's always very important to just make sure that you make that distinction. Before you decide that your house is haunted or whatever, try to look at, logical explanations for things because normally there are. Um, so that's pretty much all I have for today. If you have any questions, if I get enough questions, then I would be happy to answer them. If you want, just put them in the comments below. Um, and everybody have a great evening and have a great weekend. Thanks. Bye bye.